Thinking about buying an old Mk1 Nissan Leaf? This guide's for you. I'll cover how to operate the car and also give some thoughts on range and battery life. Okay, to start the car, first depress the foot brake. It won't start, or it won't run until you've depressed the foot brake, and then click the start button. When the car's ready, you'll see a green icon here. Gear selection is very straightforward. If you pull the knob over and down, it puts it into drive. If you pull the knob over and up, it puts it into reverse. To go back into park, you press the P button. There is an additional mode if you're in drive, and you're in drive, and then you click it over once more. You'll see that the what would be D for drive on here has changed to B, and that B mode is a regenerative braking mode, so you get increased regenerative braking. Most of the time though, you'll probably keep it in D mode for drive. Another button worth pointing out is this eco mode. Now eco mode here, if you press this, you'll see the eco disappears up there, or press it again, it appears again. This reduces the amount of power available to the drivetrain. So I find generally driving around in eco mode, the car's plenty sprightly enough to get me where I'm going with plenty of oomph, but if you turn that off it will accelerate obviously faster, although at the downside of a bit of loss of range. In fact, if you press it and you look at the range calculator on the right, turn it off, the range drops by a couple of miles. The Leaf doesn't have a handbrake in the traditional sense. Like some cars, it uses a foot operated parking brake. And obviously before you need to go anywhere you need to be able to turn this off. So this is a push on push off operation, so it's on at the moment, so a push to release the parking brake and a push to put it on again. Okay, so the all important bit is of course battery health. Now on this gauge on the right hand set of bars shows you your battery health overall out of 12, so in my case still on 11 bars out of 12, which represents somewhere between about 75 and 82% of battery life still remaining. And these bigger bars on the left are the current state of charge. So these 6 bars, it's estimating, and it is a very rough estimate, around 39 miles of range. This power meter is somewhat analogous to a rev meter. As you're accelerating, you'll see this go up. If you're accelerating hard, you might even get it to go all the way up here. When it's regenerating, it will light up green dots on this side basically. So downhills or braking, you'll see these light up, and that shows you're putting charge back into the battery. This is battery temperature. You shouldn't really have to worry too much about this. This should stay fairly constant around here in a British climate. To the right of the steering wheel there are a few important buttons. First button here releases the hatch at the front to access the charging ports. The second button allows us to lock the charging lead in place to avoid theft. The third is to switch the charging timer off, so you can set your car to charge only at a certain time, for instance when electricity prices are low in the early hours of the morning, but obviously you may need to charge when out and about, so you can just click this button to turn off the charge timer. This button here turns off the noise the car makes to warn pedestrians of its presence. So USB port for charging, phone connection, etc. is here. To be honest, it's a very slow charging port. You are better off using the cigarette lighter socket, I think. With an adapter, it's actually quite hard to spot, and in fact it's up under here. Also in the centre console we have this menu. So this one is there's an overall menu which gives things like route setting, etc. information, and some broadcast settings, display, volume and beeps, etc. as well. Arguably more useful is this zero emission button, which opens up things like your long life mode setting, etc. I'll talk about that in a moment. Setting your climate temperature, etc. Also in here you have your energy information settings, which will show you things like the amount of energy you're using at any point during your drive. Again, if you turn on your climate control, for instance, you will see that this top gauge will jump up as you start to use energy to drive climate control. Another couple of nice features in the centre console are this driving range piece. So again, based on where I am location wise, this will show me the driving range available with the mileage still in the battery. Obviously, as you charge, this circles will get bigger. There's a few others. You can start to see where nearby stations for charging are, etc. as well. And again, you can use that as the basis for selecting one and navigating to it in order to find a charging station. Car key fob has 3 buttons: the lock and unlock, as you'd expect on most cars, and this little button here, which is for opening the charge port cover. So to show this bottom button in use, to open the charge ports, light press, hold it down. Inside you have 2 ports, so you have the Type 1 for 3-pin charging at home, or you can get a Type 2 to Type 1 converter for slower charging, I think up to 7 kilowatts. You also have the fast charging port, or CHEDEMO port. It's what you use for a fast charge at a service station. So earlier on I flashed up this graph quickly, which shows the battery capacity against the bars shown on the meter. And I thought it'd be quickly useful before we finish just to have a quick run through of what this means in terms of practical real world range. So this table gives a real world range estimation on a sort of typical British temperature. We're kind of lucky that we sit in that sweet spot of not too hot and not too cold to get maximum range out of the early leaf. Now the first column shows the bars, so the battery state of health bars that you see on the right hand side of your battery meter on the dashboard. The second column indicates the rough amount of state of health lost as each bar drops off, so about 15% for the loss of the first bar, and the same 13% for the last bar, with everything else a bit less. In the real world, that means that the capacity drops from about 100% when brand new to 16% down to the last bar, so not really any usable practical range. Now, a key point is that even though the car is quoted as 24 kilowatts, the real life capacity is probably about 22 kilowatt hours is what's broadly quoted. So a bit of simple maths tells us that if we apply that 22 kilowatts to a pretty heavy footed 3.5 miles per kilowatt, we can see 77 expected miles range. But if we drive a more granny like at 5 miles per kilowatt hour, which is very achievable in eco mode, and a careful right foot, you can achieve more like 110 miles per hour. In real world driving day to day in eco mode, I find my per kilowatt hour miles per kilowatt indicator usually shows at around 4.5 miles with pretty conservative driving. And these ranges sort of stack up to my real life experience. So a recent trip I did of 56 miles with a full battery, I came back and still had 13 miles in the tank, so that tallies quite nicely with what I'm seeing here. So ultimately, if you're buying an old Leaf, such as the 10-year-old one I bought, with 10 or 11 bars still showing, this is realistically the kinds of ranges you should expect in normal fair weather conditions. As you can see, if you start to drop down to much lower bars, 6 or 7 bars, you've got a really heavily compromised range to play with. So it's just something to be very aware of. One more little consideration or watch out on here though is you don't want to be creeping into your nearest charge point with a mile left on the gauge. So you really realistically going to want to charge when your battery falls below 10-15 miles of range. So you've got to factor that into your calculations as well. Final point on the range itself, obviously temperature plays a key role here. So there's been a few different studies on this by various parts of the motor industry, but they've shown that in cold weather, sort of very cold weather, so typical cold winter's day weather versus a nice balmy summer's day, we might see 20% on average loss of range. So again, this table gives an indication of that, which shows that my 56 mile round trip with my 10 to 11 bar car would be a pretty marginal trip on a cold winter's day. Something to bear in mind when you're thinking about the journeys for the winter and your daily commute, for instance. So how does that translate as the all-important cost per mile? Well, it kind of depends a bit on your driving style. I've put the table to represent that range of 3.5 miles per kilowatt hour to 5, and the cost you're paying per kilowatt hour. Now, most UK domestic tariffs day to day at the moment are on about 30 pence per kilowatt hour. So we can see that with normal driving in the sort of 4 to 4.5 efficiency range will give us a cost per mile of about 7p per mile, which is not too bad. If you can charge upon a super cheap nighttime tariff, then you could be getting that down to a couple of pence per mile. And of course, if you're having to use motorway services at the sort of extortionate rates that can be up close to 80p per kilowatt hour, then you're paying closer to sort of 17 to 20 pence per mile. Quickly, how does that stack up against ICE? Well, with a typical price of about £1.50 per litre for petrol or diesel, I know it's moving plus 10p plus minus 10p around this, or at motor service stations even 20p more. But we're talking about costs between about 14 and 23 pence per mile, depending on your miles per gallon of your car there. So what we can see is that in the worst case of having to fill up on a motorway service station, your electric car is probably not really saving you any money per mile over the ICE one. But if you can charge at a cheap tariff, or even if you're charging on normal UK electricity tariffs, you're probably saving about 2/3 on your daily per mile fuel cost. Of course, if you want to maximise the life left in what is an old battery now, if you're looking at a Mk1 Leaf, there's a few things you can do that are going to help it last longer, and are probably the reason why it has a good battery, if it still has a good battery at this age. Firstly, for day-to-day use, if you can keep the charge between 20 and 80%, that is better at preserving this style of lithium-ion battery. High charge for sitting at 100% charge for a long time will cause significant battery degradation more quickly. There is an 80% charge limit button available in the settings, which will help you maintain that. Of course, if you really do need the range for a longer trip, then charge to full capacity, but then don't leave the car sitting around for a long time at 100%. Secondly, using slow charging whenever possible is also preferable and gives less battery degradation. So that home granny charger for your day-to-day charging is going to help your battery live longer than constantly using the fast CHAdeMO charger at service stations. But again, that's always there if you need it. For instance, if you are on a longer journey and you do need to put some charge into the battery quite quickly. So what it boils down to is this: if you need a car for frequent short journeys that are bad for ICE engines, if you want super efficient low running costs and you don't have any distance range requirement from the car, I think an old Nissan Leaf is a pretty good buy. In our case, it's a second car, so we always have the other petrol car if we need to do long range driving. It's pretty practical, plenty of space, easy to operate, super comfy and easy to drive, and prices have come down an awful lot. So again, for an automatic small hatchback of this age, it's very comparably priced to an ICE equivalent. As ever, I hope you found the information useful. If you did, and maybe I'll post a follow-up on how I got on with the car in a year or so's time, 6 months to a year's time, do like and subscribe, and I will post more content on this subject.